It is your Thursday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Happy to be back for another day. Hope everybody's having a great day out there today. Really good show coming up. Bobby Nightengale from the Tribune joins me here in just a few minutes to talk Twins. Interesting team this season. Convincing win yesterday, 17-9. Offense comes alive. The kind of game that can make everybody feel a little bit better about themselves. The team is doing fine overall. If the season ended today, they'd be the wild card, the last wild card, so the sixth best team in the American League. That feels about like where they deserve to be right now. Probably on pace for about as many wins as they had a year ago. But some inconsistency this year. Some underperformance, some overperformance too. And Bobby and I will also get into what they might be targeting once we get to the trade deadline. I know it's a ways away, but as we think about what this team needs, what could they be identifying and targeting once we do get to that point where just a couple months left in the season, what could they be looking to add, especially if they think they are a playoff caliber team again this season? My favorite guy, Aaron Rodgers, is back in the news, not at mandatory minicamp for the Jets, because I guess he just didn't feel like it. Talk about that a little bit at the end of the show. First, though, what did I miss? Celtics go up 3-0 on the Mavericks. Game 3 was Wednesday night in Dallas. Watched probably most of the second half of that game as Boston was pulling away, as Dallas was pulling closer. It looked like it was going to be a blowout. Boston had that lead up to, I think, 21 at one point with a barrage of threes. Dallas got that thing all the way back within 1 or 2 points in the closing minutes, but Luka fouls out. A couple controversial but correct calls foul him out of the game. He's whining, pouting. Couting. Maybe that's a lesson. Don't whine and pout your way through the entire NBA season, entire NBA finals, entire NBA career. You might get a couple more clutch calls, although he does seem to get a lot of calls. Anyway, Boston wins 106-99. They've now held Dallas under 100 points in all 3 games of these finals. Dallas can't get it going. That just doesn't look like the same Dallas team that dispatched the Wolves in 5 games. And I know a lot of those games were close, especially games 1, 2, and 3. But, Dallas was the better team in that series. So now you take that and you look at Dallas being the better team in that series, Boston clearly being the better team in this series. Does that tell you a little bit more about how far off the Wolves are? Or does it tell you more about matchups? Dallas a bad matchup for the Wolves, Boston a bad matchup for Dallas. I don't know exactly what it tells you, but here's what I'm thinking right now, thinking about Boston. I'm thinking about how good Boston has been, the last several years, but especially the last couple years, right? They went to the conference finals last year, close to making it back to the finals a year ago. They got down 3-0 in the conference finals last year, got it all the way back to 3-3 before losing in Game 7 of the conference finals. Year before that, went to the NBA finals before losing in the finals a couple years ago. So you got a team that's been on the cusp, right? Even before that, they were winning, high 40s to mid 50s games every year. A while back it was the Kyrie Irving era, then it was Jason Tatum. They've kind of had Tatum and Brown running the show for several years now. But what they did this past offseason was retool kind of the strong cast around Tatum and Brown, right? They traded Marcus Smart this offseason. They brought in Kristaps Porzingis. They brought in Drew Holiday. They kind of rebuilt some of the key players, some blockbuster trades, dealt out a couple first-round picks, remade their roster. Now, that was a risky thing to do, right? Because they were good. That was a good team. They could have run it back, tried to bring back all their same guys, and you would have said, okay, Boston is still a championship contender. But instead, they said, nope, we believe in some parts of our core. We're going to keep some of this intact, but we need to work on solidifying, not just our top 8, but our top 5, our starters. Bring in Porzingis, who was key for them this year until he got hurt. Bring in Drew Holiday, who has absolutely been essential for them this year and is maybe the biggest difference in this year's team over last year's team. Even though I know Marcus Smart is an excellent player, excellent defensive player, Drew Holiday is probably, for my money, the best two-way point guard in this league, both offense and defense. Can make a bucket, can shoot the 3, Defensively, he is amazing. He is maybe the difference maker on this year's team. So they do a pretty dramatic overhaul of their roster, even coming off of 2 seasons where they were on the cusp of winning a championship. Does that inform and in any way how the Wolves should be thinking about this offseason? I think you can look at it one of 2 ways. One, you say, yeah, like even though they made it to the Western Conference Finals, this team has some redundancies on their roster, right? Like you got Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns, Naz Reid. You got 3 guys to play 2 positions that are starting caliber players. Can you ease the log jam there and get yourself some more help on the perimeter? Do you look at what you've got and say, we need a little bit more of this, we need a lot more of that, we need a little less of this, a little less of that? That's a big question. I think they could absolutely look at it and say, we need to get better to at least get back to the conference finals, because this isn't just assured. You're not just going to get back there because you got there this year. Flip side of that, of course, is, hey, Boston is a lot further along in their playoff trajectory than the Wolves were. Boston has been on the cusp of winning a title many times, a bunch of trips to the conference finals these last 2 years before this in particular. So they were further along. They knew more about what they needed. They knew they had the chemistry they needed in the spots that they needed it. They needed to retool. They had more information about what they had and what they are lacking. So maybe the Wolves can't do that yet. Maybe they need another year to figure out what they have versus what they need. But I think the big picture takeaway is, the Wolves were close this year, but they weren't ready to win a championship. And is the roster they have right now, is that a championship roster, or do they need some fairly significant changes still to feel like you're more than just a nice team next year that could maybe get back to this point versus a team that could be a bona fide championship contender?
I'm Nyla Jean Myers, Senior Assistant Sports Editor at the Star Tribune. Thank you for listening to Strip Sports Daily Delivery. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast and our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
Let's talk Twins today with Bobby Nightengale Jr. coming off kind of a wild game Wednesday, Bobby. Final score 17-9. It sounds like it's like a football, low-scoring football game, high-scoring baseball game. Weird, Twins take a big lead. There's a rain delay. Colorado kind of throws a scare in them, gets it back to 10-8, but then they blow it open with 7 runs in the 8th inning. They had 24 hits. I think I saw 8 guys had at least 2 hits. So a get well day for the offense, and a bit of a microcosm of the season, because they've been, awfully good against the not so good teams and awfully bad against the really good teams, which I suppose is kind of as expected for a team that's kind of right on that cusp, right in that last wild card spot.
Yeah, you talk about just kind of how the season's gone. You go for a week where they don't really score much offense, and had we done this podcast a week ago, that probably would have been the theme is, well, these guys can't hit. And then today, right. 24 hits, and Carlos Correa has 5 hits, and Royce Lewis hits another homer, and offense looks a lot better when you score 17 times and you have 24 hits. But yeah, it's one of those, that's kind of been the theme of their season. They got beat up by the Yankees in both their series. They haven't been able to beat Cleveland. But when they are playing teams that are below 500, they've been, crushing them at a pretty good rate. And that's kind of the message that I've heard just talking to, I've asked players about it. I've asked Rocco. He's aware that they're 0-14 against the top 3 teams in the American League. But, Rocco kind of pointed out, it's not like they got blown out in all those games. You could argue, the Yankees had the upper hand clearly in those series, but they probably felt like they gave some games away against Cleveland. Duran gave up some late homers in those that cost them. So it's not like they're out of that league. It's just, for whatever reason, they haven't won a game in that tier yet. But it's also the way baseball is built. Outside of Cleveland, they're not going to see the Yankees again. They'll only see the Orioles for 3 more games. So, they still feel like they're a good team in terms of, they haven't had that success against those teams, but they've had a lot of success against everybody else.
Does that basically explain most of what we think of as their inconsistency this year? Like anytime it seems like they're hot and cold, like they'll lose a bunch in a row. Then, like the start of the year, they were 7-13, then they were 17-3, then they had lost a bunch of games, then won 9 out of 12, lost 5 more in a row, and now won 3 out of 4. Is it mostly just that that's that's how their schedule has stacked up? It's not so much how they're playing, it's who they're playing?
I mean, it's got to be a little like partially, right? I mean, you look at like that 12-game winning streak. A lot of that came against the White Sox and the Angels. I think they took 2 or 3 from the Red Sox in that one. But I mean, it was they beat up on bad teams, but beat them up at a rate that had they won 75% of those games and not that 12-game winning streak, so they won 9-3 instead. That still would have been successful. They just kind of pushed it over the top when they won all those games. So. I think it's just one of those, the schedule's lined up that way where it feels like here's a hard week, here's an easier week, and they've taken advantage when it's been the easier weeks. But I also feel like they've played well against some teams that like Kansas City's having a great season, and they've had the upper hand against Kansas City all year. So I do think there are good teams that they've matched up well against. It's just, for whatever reason, the Yankees always have their number, and Cleveland, they've been winless against this year.
They survived pretty well, I would say, without Royce Lewis for those 2 months, and he's obviously back now. And seems like how does he not miss a beat? He comes right back in, he starts hitting home runs again. Like, how do they explain that, and how happy are they to get him back?
Yeah, and that was the question to Royce Lewis after today's game, 5 homers in 9 games, is how do you still do this? And he goes, that's just what I do. So if he wasn't like so nice, it'd be like, oh, that's a cocky answer. But
right.
It's facts. I mean, he has 22 homers in 79 games in his career. It's just anytime he's been healthy, he's performed. And, everyone kind of says he's a superstar talent. Carlos Correa talks about hitting in front of him and how much that's kind of helped him personally, just being, you're going to get pitches to hit when Royce Lewis is hitting behind you because everyone knows what he does with runners on base. So, he's kind of like the Nelson Cruz probably a couple years ago, just that cleanup hitter in the middle of the lineup that can drive guys in. They probably don't have many other guys like him on the roster. So I think even though he's 2 years, this is his first year past his rookie, should be a sophomore slump type year. He can make an impact in so many different ways, even when he's not homering. But when he is homering like he is right now, it takes it to a different level.
And speaking of the sophomore slump year, you had Edouard Julien sent down when Royce Lewis came back. He's down in St. Paul. Can't imagine that's going to be forever, but you don't exactly know when he comes back. He's got to perform down there. They got to figure out, okay, is there another injury at some point? Is someone else underperforming? You couldn't send down Jose Miranda because he's been hitting, he's been producing. What did you make of that decision, and then what does that say for where Julien is at this point in his career?
Yeah, I mean, I was like mildly surprised when they sent him down just because of kind of what he meant to the team. I mean, kind of their leadoff hitter for basically all of last year and most of this year. When he's right, I mean, he's one of the better hitters on the team, but he struggled at AAA so far since he got sent down. It's not always the most surprising thing, just in terms of, there's frustrations getting sent down, and it's a different style of play. And then you have the automatic strike zone and some other things down there that kind of change things for guys. But I think it's also a sign of just how healthy they are. I feel like this is as healthy as they're going to get position player wise all season. And that's made it so you have to make some tough decisions. And that's kind of a good thing. I mean, I feel like it's a luxury when, okay, we can play Willie Castro at second base because we want to, not just because we have to. And he's quietly had a great season so far. Left side of the infield set. So, I mean, I feel like they're in a position now, as long as everyone stays healthy for this current stretch, you can, play the hot bats. And Jose Miranda, deserves credit for putting himself in a position where, he passed Edouard Julien in terms of we need him in the lineup right now.
We don't wish this on them, of course, but let's just say there's a small nagging injury. Someone goes on the injured list in the middle infield for a 10-day stint, something like that. Is Julien the next guy up, or is it Brooks Lee now that he's healthy and playing down in St. Paul?
Yeah, that's a question. I'd be curious if something like that happened in like the next few days, which route they would go. Brooks Lee, obviously, he hasn't played a ton at AAA so far this year. Did a rehab assignment, and he's probably 5, 6, 7 games into being back at AAA. But you talk about just how much the team believes in him, and he's a switch hitter, plays solid defense. Spring training, he really impressed in terms of like your first spring training. I feel like a lot of guys go through it where it's like, okay, you're acclimating yourself. You look like the new guy. He definitely looked more like he belonged this spring, and there was a lot of excitement for him coming out of camp. And I think he definitely would have been up right away beginning of the season with like Royce gets injured. Wouldn't have been surprised if he would have been the first guy called up to start the year. So that shows you how much they believed him in from the beginning. So I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, if he passes Edward Julian in terms of like whoever the hotter hitter is at AAA, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the one they go with. And right now that'd be Brooks Lane.
You mentioned their health, and they've been relatively healthy in the starting rotation too. I mean, we mentioned before we started recording, they've only used 6 starting pitchers all year, and you had the injury to the guy they traded for, Anthony DeSclafani, right before the season started, and they didn't really know what they were going to get out of him all year. But they start the year with the starting 5 of Pablo Lopez and obviously Joe Ryan and Bailey Ober, Chris Paddock, and then you had Louis Varland at the start. Varland falters. They bring up Simeon Woods Richardson. Nobody's gotten hurt. Knock on wood. I'm sure they're knocking on wood right now that I just said that. Varland makes a really good start the other day, kind of a spot start to get these guys a little bit of extra rest. But to only use 6 starters at this point in the season, that's got to be a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, I was just reading the Milwaukee Brewers have already used 12, and it's like, okay, if the Twins had to use 12 starters, like who's the number 12 starter on their organizational depth chart? I mean, that would be, you're probably reaching to AA at that point, or just finding, guys in indie ball to come off the street. So
Dallas Keuchel.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I feel like they're in a fortuitous position there that they've only had to use 6 and, give credit to the guy like Simeon Woods Richardson. I mean, when he got called up, he was an unknown. I mean, was throwing a little harder, had a good spring, but really hadn't done anything in his big league career. And the fact he's pitching as well as he has, you can kind of see him gaining confidence with each start too, being like, I'm going to throw more pitches in the strike zone. I'm going to attack more guys, and he's having success with it, which I feel like he's building on each start. But I think pitching wise, I mean, if they don't lead the league in strikeouts, they're top 2 or 3. I think they've thrown the fewest walks or second fewest walks. So, the results have been kind of up and down. They're probably not as consistent as they would like, but if you're striking everyone out and you're not issuing walks, I mean, that you're putting yourself at least in a good position. And if you would have told me before the season, like Pablo Lopez's numbers would be this, I think probably you would think the team's doing worse than what they are, where, they're several games above 500.
Right. And Pablo Lopez got the win Wednesday, kind of, turned things around a little bit for himself. He wasn't dominant, but he was good enough for those 5 innings. But Lopez ERA is still over 5. Paddock just got his under 5 the other day with that really good start. Woods Richardson's been the pleasant surprise. Joe Ryan's been really good. Bailey Ober kind of mixed results. Like when I looked it up a few days ago, I'm sure it's a little bit better now, but their starters ERA was like 25th in baseball. Do they think they're pitching to a little bit of bad luck at this point, even though they've been healthy in that regard?
I don't know if bad luck, but definitely like things they can, like guys are trending upwards in terms of like Chris Paddock, increases velocity in the past few starts. Said he was going through like a dead arm phase, which sounds worse than it is, but coming off Tommy John surgery, he's starting to get into a groove. This is the most he's thrown as a starter in a few years. So I feel like he's trending upwards. Simeon Woods Richardson's look really good. I'd be curious, the 25th ERA, what it is after Varland, because Varland had some, obviously some poor numbers in his first 4 starts. But like Joe Ryan, he has a case to make the All-Star team. I feel like there's been like a clunker here and there for Bailey Ober, but for the most part, he's been pretty consistent. I just feel like Pablo Lopez, I mean, not that he's pitching like a number 5 starter, like he's not poor, but he's just not as dominant, I think. Like, I feel like the expectation coming into the year was like he could put himself in the Cy Young conversation, and it definitely hasn't been able to get to that level. But you take away the Yankee start where he walks 6 guys, and that's never really been his thing. Like, he's a guy who throws strikes. You take that one away, you take today and the Houston Astros start, like things are looking a little bit better for him too. So I feel like they look at it as our starting rotation is getting better than what it was a month ago.
They're not. There's been considerable social media chatter, panic about Lopez. That sometimes it's velocity, sometimes it's just the numbers, things like that. Where do you think they are internally on just the start he's had this year?
Yeah, I think there's just like if you look at like his advanced stats, I think he grades out as like one of the unluckiest in terms of like how much he's striking out guys and walking guys. The numbers should be like a 3 ERA instead of a 5.
Okay.
So I do think there's some of the like keep doing what you're doing. There are obviously some things you need to improve upon. but you're not as bad as what your numbers say they
Okay.
are. And I kind of get that sense from him. But it's also, I mean, he was so dominant last year after like the first 2 months. I feel like the first 2 months last year, he also had a high ERA, maybe not 5, but like 4.5. I mean, then it was really good the last 4 months of the season. So it's not like a complete unfamiliar position for him. Not the first time he struggled. So I do think internally they're like, okay, this, it hasn't gone the way you wanted. There are certainly things he needs to improve upon, especially like his sweepers not getting the swings and misses it did last year. But it's not as bad as the ERA may say.
They're in an interesting spot right now because just looking at the standings, they would be the third wild card right now, the last wild card. So that means they're sixth in the American League. Obviously last year they won the division, and which was a much weaker division last year. Now there's Cleveland playing really well. Kansas City would also be a wild card team above the Twins right now if the season ended today, and it doesn't. There's almost 100 games left, so a lot to sort out still. But where do you think they kind of are at relative to expectations? How do you think they feel about where they are right now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's been much more of a roller coaster than they ever expected in terms of just the winning, losing swings that they've been on, those streaks. They just really haven't played. I'd be curious if they played more of an even style. Had only one 5-game losing streak to this point and one 5-game winning streak. Would everyone kind of react differently in terms of like? I just feel like it's been super high and super low, and just depending on the week, that's how you feel about the team. But internally, I think they feel like they're in a fine spot. I'd be curious where their record compares to at this point last year. I would probably say I would think it's a little bit better than where it was at this exact same point. It's just Cleveland's been on a great run. Kansas City's been winning more. So when you're 9 games back and in third place, it looks a lot worse. But I feel like internally they feel like there's still a lot of guys that, Royce Lewis has only played 9 games so far. Ryan Jeffers has been kind of up and down, but his ups have been great. And Carlos Correa's hit pretty well for the most part compared to that. But for the most part, I mean, you look at like some other guys as a part of the lineup, like Christian Vasquez. Obviously, they had higher hopes for him offensively than what he's produced to this point. Max Kepler's been really quiet since the first month. Byron Buxton really hasn't caught fire at all offensively this year. So I do feel like there's some of we haven't played to our full potential yet, and that gives them hope, going forward.
Weird to say this off of a 17 run 24 hit game, but I mean a lot of the narrative this season has just been how dominant pitching is across the board in baseball, and you've got all these designer pitches, more velocity, things like that. Like how do you think that is just how is that playing into just the overall narrative of 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's a lot easier to get better as a pitcher than it is as a hitter these days, just
Agreed.
In terms of every pitcher in the offseason can go with their own special pitching coach and can always work on things. And you get instant feedback now just with the technology that they have, the slow motion cameras, that can break it down by frame, and just kind of the amount of data that they get back from everything. I just think you just look at kind of all the relievers around the league and oh, this guy's throwing 100 now, and this guy's throwing 99, and this guy's throwing 98, and they'll have a great off-speed pitch, and you'd never heard of them. Those used to be the guys that were your setup men and closers, and now those are your 6th, 7th inning mop-up guys. So I just feel like the game's changed in regards to the average pitcher just throws so much harder, and every pitcher has at least one great breaking ball that they used to not have before.
I'm old enough to remember when 95 was a big deal, not 100. It does feel like a lot. What can hitters do to combat that? I mean, they don't have the same advantages of, you can't have a designer swing so much, like you can only adapt so much, but like how do they swing the pendulum back the other way? Do they need baseball to intervene with, moving the mound back a little bit, things like that, or is there something the offense can do to catch up to all this great pitching?
Could bring back the juice baseball from a few years ago.
There you go. Yeah.
2019, that'd juice the numbers up a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I think it's tough in terms of just, unfortunately, just the way it is analytically too. I mean, players are rewarded for home runs just because it's so much harder to string together. Funny enough saying it after a 24 hit game, but it's hard to string together singles. 3 singles in an inning compared to just hitting 1 homer. So it's kind of led to the strikeouts are king. Guys are swinging for the fences a little bit more than they used to, but and also, I mean, you see talk this year about the ball's kind of deader than it used to be. Not as many fly balls are flying out compared to like the same exit velocity that it went out last year. So that's something to watch too. But I do think maybe the automatic strike zone will probably have an effect whenever that comes to major leagues. You talk to anyone at AAA, they talk about how small the zone is and how hard it is to pitch to it. I could see that benefiting the offense, but that would probably lead to more walks too, not more excitement in terms of fans watching.
No, that is true. Couple more things for you, Bobby Nightengale. One is kind of a short-term question. One's a longer-term question. Set up the rest of the homestand. It's a 10-game homestand, which seems like a lot. Good time for it. How much do they want to capitalize on this, and then what else should we watch for in these last 7?
Yeah, I mean, it's their only homestand of the month, I think, because they have another 10-game road trip or 9-game road trip after this. So have Oakland. So kind of like you mentioned earlier with the schedule that it's been play the top teams and the bottom teams. You get the Rockies and the A's back to back. The A's twice within a week because they'll go to Oakland to start off their next road trip. So I mean, they have to look at this as kind of a time to, as healthy as they are, as the teams they're playing. I mean, you got to look at this as an opportunity to gain ground. And at least take care of business at home. Got to win those series. Royce Lewis was talking about it a little bit today. If we win enough series, we're not really worried about September. The standings will take care of itself. So I don't think any like scoreboard watching is going. Cleveland's obviously off to a great start, but huge opportunity for them. Road trip also includes Arizona and Seattle, 2 teams that are kind of that middle tier that I'd probably put the Twins kind of in that same one. So that'll be something to watch too. I mean, those are teams, if you can beat them on the road, that'd be a good sign.
Let's game this out a little bit, and so much of it depends on injuries, things like that. But let's say we get to, a little bit deeper into the season and they're kind of this same team, competitive in the division, but maybe trending more towards being competitive in the wild card race, depending on how Cleveland winds up and even Kansas City. What if anything, if you could just add one thing to this team at the trade deadline, what do you think that would be?
Probably a Sonny Gray.
Yeah, Sonny Gray in particular, or a Sonny Gray type?
A Sonny Gray type. I can't imagine Seattle or St. Louis trades him, but another frontline starter. I mean, if you look at the rotation they have and you said, you could push one down, obviously injuries are always a concern when you're talking about pitchers, but just the fact when they got in the playoffs, I mean, I was talking to Michael A. Taylor when the Twins were just in Pittsburgh and how well they were set up last year to have success in the postseason. I mean, you talk about Pablo Lopez, Sonny Gray, Joe Ryan, they hardly needed them. That was a solid rotation. Bailey Ober. I mean, you only need 3 starters basically in the postseason. So you look at how would the Twins line up theirs right now, Pablo Lopez, Bailey Ober, Joe Ryan, those 3, maybe Chris Paddock. So, I mean, you look at it, could you add one more that would, add a huge punch to that group? To me, that would make a big difference for the playoffs in those short series.
That is my answer too, and it kind of felt like that was maybe their plan going in, that they knew they were probably a frontline starter short, but they didn't maybe have the resources to have one for 6 months of the year, but maybe they can have the resources to have one for 2 months of the year and go from there. Does that seem plausible to you? Yeah,
I mean, you look at. Obviously, they knew they needed to add rotation help in the offseason. They never did. So to me, that has to resonate on some level. I also think offensively, I mean, like if Jose Miranda keeps doing what he's doing, and Brooks Lee or Edward Julian or whomever, can fill in the infield, your offense is going to look better than it is today. And if Royce Lewis keeps hitting home runs, so I don't see it like a huge hole offensively. That's like, oh, they need a left fielder because no one, it's a death hole there. There are obviously spots they can get more production from, first base especially. But Carlos Santana's been trending upwards. I mean, I don't see anything that's like this is the one position that's killing them, and they have no one at AAA to help them. Yeah. Whereas frontline starting pitching, David Festa's been pitching really well, pitching prospect, and Louis Varland as well as he looked the other day. Those aren't guys that are going to start. A wild card series for you. So to me, that's why I'd put that one before offensive help.
I think that makes sense. We'll see how they fare on the rest of this homestand. We'll see if they can string together some normal weeks, like some 5-2 weeks, 4-3, even 3-4, instead of all this, big winning streaks, big losing streaks. They're done with the Yankees. I'm sure they feel good about that. The Yankees just absolutely had them this year as they've had them for the past 2 decades or so. Bobby, appreciate it as always. Go finish up. I know it's been a long day, rain delay, everything like that on Wednesday. So appreciate you checking in, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mike.
Great stuff from Bobby. Really enjoyed talking to him as always. Such great insights on the Twins. After we talked Wednesday, late afternoon, early evening, some reports emerged that likely today the Twins will be sending down Alex Kirilloff, who's been struggling for the better part of a month, and bringing up Austin Martin for a stretch here. We'll see when that becomes official today, but watch for that transaction coming after Bobby and I talked on Wednesday. Let's finish with the cooler. Aaron Rodgers not at Jets minicamp. It's being explained basically that it's an unexcused absence, even if the Jets knew about it. It's mandatory, so they've got to fine him. Yeah, he's been there for most of the offseason stuff already, the OTAs, things like that. Diana Rossini of The Athletic basically saying he just doesn't want to be there. He wants to be somewhere else. That is not a great excuse in my book, especially for a guy who has preached about, keeping this thing together, about all the things that matter, all the things that go into building a winning culture. For him to ditch out of minicamp without a great reason does not sound to me like a very good excuse. And then we're talking about, most of the players on the team didn't know about it. Tyrod Taylor, the backup quarterback who ended up taking up a lot of the first team reps, didn't know about it till the day before. Like, what a weird situation. What a not great way for the Jets to go into year 2 of the Aaron Rodgers era. But you wouldn't expect anything different from the Aaron Rodgers experience. That'll do it for me today. Should have Marcus Fuller on Friday show to talk some Gophers men's basketball, maybe a little NBA draft too, because I think he's been cooking up some NBA mock draft stuff for a couple weeks from now. Programming note for next week, and I'll mention this again tomorrow, no daily delivery next week. Taking some time off, taking a little vacation while the getting's good, while the sports calendar maybe has a little bit of a lull. Be back the week after with Royce on that Monday, setting up draft stuff, Twins, everything like that. So no shows next week. Marcus Fuller tomorrow. And enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Be back at it again on Friday.